The family destroyed her life, until the hidden document brought down the million-dollar scheme. On the day the Von Hartmann family celebrated the triumph of Elise and Dorian, the entire room froze when Clara appeared at the door. The same daughter they had expelled years before, the same one they all declared incapable of handling her own name. She walked slowly to the center of the room, ignoring whispers, sideways glances, and the growing panic on her stepmother's face. In her hands, Clara carried only a yellowed sheet, marked by time, folded in four. "What are you doing here?" Dorian whispered, unable to disguise his fear. Clara opened the document before everyone. Her father's signature gleamed at the top, incontestable, original, irrefutable. And while Elise tried to advance, screaming that it was fake, Clara said the phrase that destroyed the million-dollar scheme in that very instant. "This is the only version of the will that matters, and you spent years trying to hide it." The entire room fell silent. The family's downfall began there, with a single sheet of paper. Clara von Hartmann's story was always told by those trying to erase her, until the day she decided to write her own version. For years, the young heiress was portrayed as fragile, unstable, incapable of assuming her father's legacy. The public believed it. The lawyers believed it. Even Clara began to doubt her own memory, but none of it was true. When Adrian von Hartmann died, Elise and Dorian constructed a precise plan: create false reports, manipulate doctors, destroy Clara's reputation, and assume the philanthropic empire he left behind. And they succeeded. Clara lost her home, her future, and even the right to carry her own last name. What the family never imagined was that Adrian had also predicted everything. Before dying, he left a hidden clue, a code that only Clara would be able to decipher. And that clue led her to the document that would dismantle years of lies. The viewer came to hear a story about inheritance, but they'll stay to witness how a destroyed woman found the last piece that transformed the entire von Hartmann empire and brought down each one of those who tried to erase her. The von Hartmann mansion stood like a monument to success on the hills of Connecticut. 40 rooms, marble columns, gardens that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Inside, however, the air carried something heavier than luxury. It carried secrets. Clara von Hartmann grew up in those halls, the only daughter of Adrian von Hartmann, the renowned philanthropist whose fortune came from technology patents and whose reputation was built on charity. Her childhood was filled with her father's lessons: integrity, compassion, resilience. Adrian wasn't just a businessman, he was a teacher, a protector, a man who believed wealth carried responsibility. "One day all of this will be yours," he told Clara on her 16th birthday, standing in his private study overlooking the estate. "But more than the money, I'm leaving you the mission, to help those who can't help themselves. That's the real inheritance." Clara had smiled then, believing she had forever to prepare. The arrival of Elise. Everything changed when Adrian remarried. Elise Thornton entered the family like a storm dressed in elegance. A former model turned art dealer, she possessed sharp intelligence hidden behind practiced charm. She brought with her Dorian, her son from a previous marriage, a young man with ambition etched into every calculated smile. At first, Clara tried to welcome them, but Elise's affection was performative, reserved for moments when Adrian was watching. Behind closed doors, her coldness cut like winter wind. "Your father needs someone mature by his side," Elise once told Clara in the hallway. "Someone who understands the complexity of his world, not a dreamy girl living in fairy tales." Dorian was subtler, but no less cruel. He positioned himself as Adrian's protégé, studying business, attending board meetings, slowly inserting himself into every decision. He never confronted Clara directly. He simply acted as if she didn't exist. The sudden death Adrian von Hartmann died on a Tuesday in October, collapsing during a charity gala. The official cause: sudden cardiac arrest. He was 58 years old. Clara's world shattered in that moment. She had lost not just her father, but her anchor, her guide, the only person who truly saw her. The funeral was grand, attended by politicians, celebrities, and business magnates. Elise played the grieving widow with Oscar-worthy precision, draped in black, accepting condolences with trembling hands. Dorian stood beside her, the dutiful son, his face a mask of controlled sorrow. Clara couldn't even cry properly. The shock had frozen something inside her, the emotional siege. The manipulation began within days. "Your father's affairs are incredibly complicated," Elise explained softly, sitting across from Clara in the study that now felt like enemy territory. There are holdings across 12 countries, investments that require immediate attention, legal matters that can't wait. You understand this is overwhelming, don't you? Clara nodded, still numb. I think it would be best if Dorian and I handled the transition period. Just temporarily, until you're ready. When will that be? Elise smiled gently. When you're stronger, darling. Right now, you're clearly not yourself. Anyone can see that. The seed was planted. Clara wasn't capable. Clara was too emotional. Clara needed protection from herself. But the false diagnosis. Within weeks, Elise arranged for Clara to see Dr. Marcus Sutherland, a renowned psychiatrist and longtime family friend. What Clara didn't know was that Elise had already met with him privately. The sessions were strange from the start. Dr. Sutherland asked leading questions, twisted her grief into symptoms, reframed her mourning as instability. You've mentioned feeling disconnected, he noted during their third session. Episodes of confusion, difficulty making decisions. These are concerning patterns, Clara. I just lost my father, she protested weakly. Of course. But there may be underlying issues we need to address, for your safety and the safety of those around you. The report Dr. Sutherland filed painted Clara as mentally unstable, prone to delusion, incapable of managing complex affairs. It recommended immediate guardianship, the psychological trap. The worst part wasn't the lies. It was how Clara began to believe them. Every time she questioned a financial decision, Elise responded with concern. You're not thinking clearly, sweetheart. Every time she asked to see legal documents, Dorian sighed. This is exactly what Dr. Sutherland warned us about. The paranoia. They surrounded her with their version of reality until her own memories felt unreliable. Had she really been close with her father? Or had she imagined that too? The grief mixed with gaslighting until Clara couldn't distinguish truth from manipulation. Within 3 months of Adrian's death, Clara had been systematically erased from every decision, every account, every position of power. The final expulsion. The breaking point came on a cold December night. Clara had discovered, quite by accident, that Dorian had begun signing documents as acting CEO of the Von Hartmann Foundation, her father's most precious legacy. When she confronted them at dinner, demanding to see the authorization, Elise's mask finally slipped. You want to see authorization? She hissed. Look at yourself, Clara. You're a mess. You can barely function. Your father would be ashamed. That's not true. We have medical documentation proving you're unfit. We have witnesses confirming your behavior. We have legal standing. You have nothing but delusion and entitlement. Dorian leaned forward, his voice cold. It's time to accept reality. This family, this fortune, this legacy, it's not yours anymore. It never really was. Clara stood from the table, trembling with rage and despair. My father left everything to me. Your father, Elise said slowly, left everything to his capable heirs. You're no longer counted among them. The departure. That night, Clara was escorted from the mansion by security, men who had known her since childhood, who now wouldn't meet her eyes. She was allowed one small suitcase. Everything else belonged to the estate, they said. Everything else belonged to Elise. As the car pulled away, Clara looked back at the only home she'd ever known. The lights glowed warm in the windows. Inside, the family that destroyed her was probably already celebrating. She had lost everything. Her home, her inheritance, her name, her father's legacy, her sense of self. But in the deepest corner of her shattered mind, one memory remained sharp and unshakable. Her father's last private words to her, whispered during his final visit to her room before the gala. If one day they turn against you, look where no one would look. At the time, she hadn't understood. She'd thought he was being paranoid, maybe even confused. Now driving away from her life with nothing but a suitcase, Clara realized her father had known. He had seen the danger, and he had left her something. The question was, what and where? Clara's new reality was a studio apartment in a forgotten corner of Queens, a place so far removed from Connecticut estates it might as well have been another planet. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, with walls so thin she could hear every argument, every crying baby, every life being lived in uncomfortable proximity. She took a job at a coffee shop called Grindhouse, making lattes for morning commuters, who never looked up from their phones long enough to notice her hands shaking as she poured the milk. The manager, a kind woman named Rosa, didn't ask questions about Clara's past. She simply showed her the espresso machine and said, "Keep your head down and the customer's happy, that's all I need." It was humiliating work for someone raised in privilege, but Clara discovered humiliation had layers she'd never imagined. The real shame wasn't serving coffee. It was the way former family friends would sometimes walk in, recognize her, and quickly look away. The way they'd whisper to their companions. The way they'd leave without ordering. The public narrative. Elise and Dorian had been thorough in destroying Clara's reputation. They hadn't just taken her inheritance, they'd poisoned her name. The story they spread through social circles, through carefully placed media mentions, through strategic whispers at charity events, was devastating in its simplicity. Clara Von Hartmann had suffered a mental breakdown following her father's death. She'd become unstable, paranoid, even dangerous. The family had tried to help her, but she'd rejected treatment. They'd been forced heartbreakingly to distance themselves for everyone's safety. "It's a tragedy," Elise told a reporter from Manhattan Society magazine, her voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. Adrian loved his daughter so much, but sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from their own demons. The article ran with a photo of Clara from years ago, slightly disheveled at a college party, caught mid-laugh in a way that could be read as unhinged if you were looking for it. The caption read, "The Fallen Heiress, a Family's Private Heartbreak." Clara read it at a library computer and felt something inside her crack further. The isolation friends from her previous life vanished like smoke. Some blocked her number without explanation. Others sent brief, uncomfortable messages. "Hey, I heard you're going through some stuff. I think it's best if we take some space. Wishing you well." Even Hannah Mitchell, her best friend since childhood, eventually stopped responding. Clara later learned that Elise had personally called Hannah's parents, expressing concern about Clara's fixation on the past and suggesting that continued contact might be enabling unhealthy patterns. The loneliness was suffocating. Clara would go entire days speaking to no one but coffee shop customers. She'd lie awake at night in her tiny apartment, staring at water stains on the ceiling, wondering if perhaps they were right. Perhaps she was losing her mind. Perhaps she'd imagined the depth of her relationship with her father. Perhaps she'd never been meant for that world. Depression settled over her like fog, thick, cold, disorienting. The struggle to survive money became an immediate crisis. The trust fund she'd relied on for basic expenses had been frozen pending psychiatric evaluation and legal review, which, her research revealed, could take years to resolve without expensive lawyers she couldn't afford. She had $300 to her name when she left the mansion. That lasted 2 weeks. Rosa at the coffee shop paid minimum wage plus tips. Clara learned to survive on staff meals and discarded pastries. She learned which corner stores sold expired food at discount. She learned to wear the same 3 outfits in rotation, to wash them in her bathroom sink, to hang them over the radiator to dry. This wasn't the struggle of someone seeking character development. This was the raw desperation of someone whose identity had been systematically erased. She tried once to get another job. A position at a small marketing firm seemed promising until the background check revealed her last name. The hiring manager's tone changed immediately in the follow-up call. "Listen, I'm sure you're talented, but we can't take on someone with your situation. Liability issues. You understand." She understood perfectly. Elise's influence reached further than she'd imagined. The haunting memories. At night, when the city finally quieted enough to hear herself think, Clara's mind always returned to her father. She remembered him in his study, patiently explaining compound interest when she was 10 years old. She remembered him taking her to site visits for the Foundation's projects, homeless shelters, youth programs, medical clinics in underserved areas. She remembered the way he'd listen when she spoke, as if her words mattered more than anything else in the world. "The measure of wealth isn't what you own," he told her once while they volunteered at a food bank. "It's what you give. And more than that, it's whether you raise up the people around you or step on them to rise yourself." Clara whispered those words to herself in the darkness of her apartment, trying to hold on to them like a life raft in drowning waters. The father's last words. One memory returned more than others, sharper each time, like her mind was trying to tell her something important. The night before the gala where he died, Adrian had come to Clara's room. It was late, past midnight, unusual for him. "Can't sleep?" she'd asked. "Thinking," he'd replied, sitting on the edge of her bed like he had when she was a child. "Clara, I need you to remember something. If one day they turn against you—" "Dad, who would turn against me?" He'd looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sadness, fear, resignation. Just remember, look where no one would look, where only you would understand to look. You're scaring me. He'd smiled then, squeezed her hand. I'm just being an overprotective father. Get some sleep, sweetheart. The next day, he was dead. Clara had replayed that conversation 1,000 times in the months since. What had he meant? Was he warning her about Elise and Dorian? Had he known they were planning something? Or was it just the random worry of a father who loved his daughter? The not knowing was torture. The letter. On a Tuesday in March, and exactly 6 months after her expulsion from the mansion, Clara returned to her apartment after a double shift to find a plain manila envelope slipped under her door. No return address, no postage. Hand-delivered. Her heart hammered as she opened it. Inside was a single item, an old brass key tarnished with age but still solid, and a note typed on plain paper. He left you everything you need, but you have to go back to find it. The study, the place where only a daughter would look. Clara's hands trembled so violently, she nearly dropped the key. She recognized it immediately, the antique key to her father's private study, the one room in the mansion that had been sealed after his death. Elise had claimed it was too painful to enter, that it would remain a shrine to Adrian's memory. But Clara knew better now. Elise had sealed it, because there was something inside she didn't want found. Clara sank onto her mattress, clutching the key, tears streaming down her face. Someone knew the truth. Someone was helping her. But who? And why now? It didn't matter. For the first time in 6 months, Clara felt something other than despair. She felt purpose. Her father had left her a message, a clue, a weapon, and she was going to find it. Clara spent 3 days preparing for what might be the most important night of her life. She couldn't simply walk up to the mansion and ask to enter. Security had been instructed to remove her on site. She needed to be invisible. The Von Hartmann estate held charity events twice monthly, continuing Adrian's tradition. Clara researched until she found the next one, a spring gala benefiting youth literacy programs, 300 guests, catering staff, valet parking, chaos, perfect cover. She spent her last paycheck on a simple black dress and pulled her hair into a tight bun. With minimal makeup and her head down, she looked like any other catering assistant. Rosa helped her acquire a temporary agency badge from a cousin who worked events. "You're not doing anything crazy, right?" Rosa asked, concerned. "Just getting back something that belongs to me." The return. Standing outside the mansion gates as the sun set felt surreal, like returning to a past life, a ghost visiting her own haunting grounds. Clara's breath came shallow as she joined the stream of catering staff entering through the service entrance. No one looked twice at her. She was invisible in the uniform of service workers, exactly as she'd hoped. The mansion glowed with warm light and elegant music. Through the windows, Clara glimpsed the party. Women in gowns, men in tuxedos, champagne flowing like water. Elise held court in the main ballroom, resplendent in emerald silk, accepting compliments on her philanthropic leadership with practiced humility. Clara's stomach churned with rage and fear. She slipped away from the catering flow, moving through familiar corridors with her heart hammering. Every shadow might hide security. Every sound might be discovery. But she knew this house. She'd grown up here. She knew the blind spots in camera coverage, the hallways rarely monitored, the routes that servants used, the sealed study. Adrian's study was on the 3rd floor, in the mansion's east wing. As Clara climbed the servants' staircase, memories assaulted her. Racing down these steps as a child, her father's laugh echoing behind her, sneaking cookies from the kitchen, the smell of his pipe tobacco drifting through the halls. She pushed the memories aside. Focus. The study door loomed before her, sealed with an electronic lock that hadn't existed during her father's life. Elise's addition, no doubt, but the old keyhole remained beneath it, the original lock that Adrian had insisted on keeping for sentimental reasons. Clara's hand trembled as she inserted the brass key. For one terrifying moment, she thought it wouldn't work. Then, click. The mechanism turned, old but functional. She slipped inside and locked the door behind her. The frozen moment. The study was exactly as Adrian had left it. Dust covered every surface, but nothing had been moved. His reading glasses sat on the desk. A book lay open to page 47. His favorite sweater hung on the chair back. It was a tomb, perfectly preserved. Clara's legs nearly gave out. The grief she'd been holding at bay crashed over her like a wave. This room smelled like him. Old books, leather, the faint hint of coffee. This was where they'd had their deepest conversations. where he'd taught her chess, where he'd told her she'd change the world someday. "Focus," she whispered to herself. "He left you a message. Find it. The search. Look where no one would look, where only a daughter would understand to look." Clara forced herself to think like her father. He was methodical, careful, strategic. If he'd hidden something important, it would be somewhere meaningful, but not obvious. She started with the desk. Too obvious. The safe behind the painting, already checked by Elise, surely. The bookshelves contained thousands of volumes, too many to search thoroughly. Then she remembered. When Clara was 8 years old, she'd gone through a phase of hiding treasure around the house. Adrian had found this delightful and created hiding spots with her, secret places only they knew about. Most were childish. Loose floorboards, hollow book spines, the back of drawers. But one was different. The piano. An old Steinway grand sat in the corner of the study, more furniture than instrument. Adrian couldn't play, but he'd inherited it from his own father and kept it for sentimental reasons. Clara had taken lessons as a child and sometimes played for him while he worked. And inside the piano, beneath the strings, was a small hollow space where the original manufacturing stamp had left a gap in the wood. They discovered it together when the piano tuner showed them during a routine service. Clara had hidden a note there once, and Adrian had written back, creating a secret message system between father and daughter. Could he have remembered? The discovery. Clara lifted the piano lid carefully, mindful of the sound. She reached into the space beneath the strings, her fingers searching the familiar hollow. At first, nothing. Her heart sank. Then, contact. Something smooth, plastic. She pulled out a sealed document protector, the kind designed to preserve important papers for decades. Inside was a thick stack of papers, yellowed with age but protected from moisture and decay. Clara's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped it. She opened the seal carefully. The first page made her gasp. Last will and testament of Adrian Augustus von Hartmann. Below it her father's signature, bold, clear, unmistakable, and the date, 2 weeks before his death. This wasn't the will Elise had presented to the courts. This was something else entirely. The truth revealed. Clara sank into her father's chair and began to read by the light of her phone. With each page, the full scope of the betrayal became clear. The document wasn't just a will, it was a comprehensive exposé. Adrian had discovered the plot against Clara. He'd uncovered evidence that Elise and Dorian were planning to manipulate his estate after his death. He'd documented everything. Falsified medical records prepared in advance, forged signatures on corporate documents, offshore accounts where they'd been secretly funneling money. He'd known. Her father had known they would betray her, and he'd prepared this insurance policy. The will itself was straightforward, everything to Clara. The foundation, the fortune, the properties, the legacy, all of it. Not a penny to Elise, not a share to Dorian. But more than that were the accompanying documents. Audio recordings of Elise and Dorian discussing their planned bank records, showing fraudulent transfers, emails detailing the conspiracy, affidavits from witnesses Adrian had secretly consulted, medical evaluations proving Clara's mental health was sound, and finally, a letter addressed simply, "To my daughter." Clara's vision blurred with tears as she read it. "Clara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and they've done exactly what I feared. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from this. I'm sorry I brought them into our lives. I'm sorry for every moment of pain they've caused you, but I'm not sorry for leaving you this. You're stronger than you know. You're smarter than they ever imagined. You have my integrity, my determination, and now you have the truth. Everything in this packet is legally sound. I worked with attorneys they don't know about. It's all authenticated, verified and registered with independent parties who will support you. Take this document and destroy them, not for revenge, though you'd be justified. Do it because they don't deserve what we built. Do it because the foundation was meant to help people, and in their hands it will only feed greed. Do it because you're my daughter and you're capable of greatness. I love you beyond measure. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry I won't be there to see you rise. But you will rise, I know you will. Dad. Clara sat in her father's chair in his study, in the house that should have been hers, holding the document that would change everything. Outside, she could hear the party continuing. Elise's laughter drifted up from the ballroom. Dorian's voice carried through the halls. They had no idea that in this sealed room, their empire had just begun to crumble. Clara carefully returned all the documents to the protector and slipped it into her bag. She took one last look around the study, her father's sanctuary, her childhood haven, the place where everything had been lost, and now, perhaps, found again. "I'll make you proud, Dad," she whispered. Then she slipped back into the shadows, a ghost in her own home carrying the weapon that would restore her life. Clara didn't return to her apartment that night. She couldn't risk it, not with what she carried. Instead, she checked into a budget motel off the highway, paying cash using a fake name. She locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and spread the documents across the threadbare bedspread. Under the harsh fluorescent light, she read everything. Every page, every word, every piece of evidence her father had meticulously compiled. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The financial fraud. The bank records showed a pattern of theft that had begun even before Adrian's death. Elise had established offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands under shell corporations with innocuous names: Thornton Consulting LLC, Heritage Management Group, Dorian Enterprises. Over the course of 2 years leading up to Adrian's death, she'd systematically siphoned money from the Von Hartmann Foundation. Small amounts at first, then increasingly bold transfers. By the time Adrian died, she'd stolen over $8 million, but the real money came after. Within weeks of Clara's expulsion, Elise and Dorian had restructured the foundation's assets, selling off properties at suspiciously low prices to companies they secretly controlled, then reselling them at market value and pocketing the difference. They'd cancelled charitable programs, redirecting funds into administrative costs that ultimately flowed into their personal accounts. The foundation that Adrian had built to help thousands was being gutted from the inside, transformed into a money laundering operation dressed in philanthropic clothes. The documents included bank statements, wire transfer records, even photographs of checks with Dorian's signature, all meticulously organized by date and amount. The medical fraud, the falsified psychiatric evaluation, was even more damning. Adrian had discovered that Elise had approached Dr. Sutherland months before Adrian's death, offering him $250,000 to diagnose Clara with whatever mental condition would justify removing her from inheritance consideration. The evidence was brutal. Email correspondence between Elise and Sutherland discussing the narrative, recorded phone calls where they coordinated Clara's evaluation, even a draft of the psychological report dated 2 weeks before Clara's first appointment. They'd written the diagnosis before they'd met with her. Dr. Sutherland had created entirely fictional session notes, attributing statements to Clara that she'd never made, describing behaviors she'd never exhibited, building a portrait of instability from whole cloth. Adrian had hired a second psychiatrist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, an independent evaluator, who had observed Clara secretly during Adrian's last months. Her evaluation included in the packet concluded, "Subject demonstrates exceptional emotional intelligence, sound judgment, and psychological resilience. No evidence of any psychiatric disorder. Subject is fully capable of managing complex responsibilities." The contrast was damning. The audio evidence, but perhaps most devastating, were the recordings. Adrian had installed hidden audio devices in several rooms of the mansion during his final weeks, not in bedrooms or bathrooms, but in common areas where Elise and Dorian often spoke freely. Clara plugged in her headphones and listened, her blood turning cold. Elise's voice clear and calculating. "Once he's gone, the girl becomes our only problem. We handle her the same way we discussed. The psychiatric angle is foolproof. Who's going to believe an unstable heiress over medical professionals?" Dorian's response. "And if she fights it, she won't. She's weak, emotional, too attached to her father's memory. We'll convince her she's the problem. People like her always believe they're the problem eventually." Another recording, dated just days before Adrian's death. Dorian. "The lawyer said the will is airtight as long as we can prove incapacity." Elise. "Sutherland will provide everything we need. By the time we're done, Clara Von Hartmann will be a cautionary tale about spoiled heiresses who couldn't handle reality." Clara paused the recording, her hands trembling with rage. They'd planned everything. Every humiliation, every loss, every moment of self-doubt. It had all been orchestrated. The legal framework. The final section of the packet outlined the legal strategy Adrian had prepared with his secret attorneys, a firm in Boston that specialized in estate litigation and fraud cases. The will was ironclad, registered with independent witnesses, notarized by officials outside of Elise's influence. It specifically revoked any prior wills and included language that anticipated challenges based on Clara's mental state, preemptively refuting them with Dr. Chen's evaluation. More importantly, the fraud documentation was criminal, not just civil. The evidence Adrian had compiled could result in federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, forgery. Elise and Dorian hadn't just stolen an inheritance. They'd committed crimes that carried prison sentences. Adrian had included contact information for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and a letter of introduction explaining the case. He'd even identified a sympathetic agent, Marcus Rodriguez, who specialized in white-collar crime and had worked with Adrian on a previous Foundation investigation. Her father had built a complete roadmap for justice. The emotional letter. Clara returned to Adrian's personal letter, reading it again in the early morning hours as exhaustion and adrenaline fought for control of her body. One section struck her especially hard. "I know you'll be tempted to doubt yourself. They're skilled manipulators, and they'll have convinced you that you're broken, that you're the problem, that you deserve what happened. Clara, listen to me. None of that is true. You are brilliant. You are kind. You are strong. You are exactly the person I hoped you'd become. The fact that you're reading this means you survived their worst. You found the truth. You didn't give up. That's who you are. That's my daughter. Now finish what I started. Not just for us, for every person who's been lied about, stolen from, erased. Show them that truth doesn't stay buried forever." Clara folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest, letting herself cry for the first time since finding the documents. These weren't tears of despair. They were tears of grief mixed with something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The decision. As dawn broke over the motel parking lot, Clara made her decision. She could take this to lawyers quietly, fight it out in court over years while Elise and Dorian continued their theft. Or she could do what her father had really trained her for: expose the truth publicly, spectacularly, in a way that would leave no room for doubt or manipulation. Adrian had taught her that sunlight was the best disinfectant, that corruption thrived in darkness but died in exposure. She picked up her phone and composed a careful email to the Boston law firm, attaching scans of key documents. She also sent a package of evidence to Agent Rodriguez at the FBI, just as her father had instructed. But that was just the foundation. Clara opened a new browser window and searched for the date of the Von Hartmann Foundation's annual gala, the biggest event of the year, attended by major donors, media, politicians. The event where Elise and Dorian would receive awards for their philanthropic leadership. It was in 3 weeks. Perfect. Clara wasn't just going to reclaim her inheritance. She was going to destroy them in front of everyone who'd believed their lies, everyone who'd shunned her, everyone who'd written her off as a tragic failure. She would walk into that gala not as the broken girl they'd expelled, but as the rightful heir carrying irrefutable proof of their crimes. And she would burn their empire to the ground with her father's truth. The preparation begins. Clara checked out of the motel and returned to the city with new purpose. The documents were now stored in 3 places: her possession, a safety deposit box at a bank, and with the attorneys in Boston. She met with the law firm virtually. Senior partner Margaret Whitmore, a steel-haired woman with a reputation for decimating fraudulent estates. Margaret reviewed everything and confirmed what Clara already knew. The case was airtight. "This is the most comprehensively documented fraud I've seen in 30 years of practice," Margaret said, her eyes sharp behind designer glasses. "Your father was thorough. These people are going to prison." "I want it public," Clara said firmly. "No quiet settlements, no sealed records, everything exposed." Margaret smiled, a predator recognizing a kindred spirit. "Then we'll give them a show they'll never forget." Agent Rodriguez was equally impressed when they met for coffee in the anonymous downtown café. He was younger than Clara expected, with kind eyes and the careful demeanor of someone who'd seen humanity's worst. "I worked with your father on a fraud case 5 years ago," he told her. "He was one of the good ones. I'm sorry for your loss. Help me make it mean something. Already started the investigation based on what you sent. We'll coordinate with the civil case. When you're ready to move publicly, we'll be there." Everything was falling into place. The transformation. Clara used the remaining weeks to transform herself, not physically, but psychologically. She studied everything about the foundation, the finances, the properties. She memorized names, numbers, dates. She prepared for every possible question, every challenge, every attempt to discredit her. She also prepared emotionally. This would be brutal. Elise would attack viciously. Dorian would lie convincingly. Former friends would doubt her. The media would scrutinize every detail of her life. But Clara had something they didn't: the truth. And truth, her father had always said, was the most powerful weapon in existence. On the night before the gala, Clara stood in her tiny apartment, looking at the woman in the mirror. She looked different now. Not broken, not defeated, but forged. Tempered by betrayal into something harder, sharper, unbreakable. Tomorrow, she told her reflection, we burn it all down. The document sat in her bag, ready to detonate. The family that destroyed her had no idea what was coming. Margaret Whitmore's law office became Clara's headquarters in the final week before the gala. The conference room walls were covered with evidence, photographs, documents, timelines, all connected by strings of red yarn like a detective's murder board. This is our narrative, Margaret explained, pointing to the timeline. We start with your father's death, show the immediate moves Elise and Dorian made. The speed of it proves premeditation. Then we introduce the medical fraud. That's emotional. That'll turn the audience. Then we hit them with the financial evidence, but that's when it becomes criminal. Finally, we end with your father's voice, his recordings, his letter. That's when it becomes legacy. Clara studied the board, absorbing every detail. They'll claim the documents are fake. Let them try. We have 3 independent forensic analysts ready to testify. We have the original attorneys who witnessed your father's will. We have Dr. Chen's evaluation. We have FBI confirmation of the fraud. They can claim whatever they want. We have facts. Robert Chen, the firm's media strategist, joined them. He was a former journalist who'd shifted to legal communications, and his presence signaled how seriously they were taking the public aspect of this case. The story writes itself, Robert said, scrolling through his tablet. Grieving daughter expelled from home, mentally destroyed by false diagnosis, living in poverty while stepfamily steals millions meant for charity. Then, plot twist, father left her the weapon to fight back. It's Cinderella meets legal thriller. The media will eat this alive. I don't want sympathy, Clara said firmly. I want justice. You'll get both, Margaret assured her. But Robert's right. The narrative matters. This isn't just about you winning in court. It's about destroying their credibility so completely that they never recover. Identifying the vulnerabilities. They spent days analyzing every weakness in Elise and Dorian's position. Elise's vulnerability was her performance. She'd spent years playing the devoted wife, the caring stepmother, the reluctant guardian forced to make hard decisions. That image was her armor, but it was also brittle. One crack, and the whole facade would shatter. She'll try to maintain composure, Margaret predicted. She'll claim she acted in good faith, relied on medical professionals, made painful decisions out of love. We counter by showing she paid those professionals, show the conspiracy, show the greed. Dorian's weakness was different: arrogance. He'd positioned himself as the capable heir, the business genius who saved the foundation from mismanagement. He believed his own press. He'll try to defend the financial decisions, Robert noted. He'll say the restructuring was necessary, that he increased efficiency, that accusations of theft are baseless. That's when we show the offshore accounts, show the shell companies, show him signing checks to himself. But their greatest vulnerability was simpler. They hadn't expected Clara to fight back. They think you're broken, Margaret said. They think you accepted your fate. That's their fatal mistake. Surprise is a weapon, and we're going to use it. The evidence presentation. They designed the presentation with precision. Clara would need to hold the room's attention for at least 20 minutes while she laid out the case. In a gala full of wealthy donors with short attention spans, that required strategy. Robert suggested a multimedia approach. We project key documents on screen as you talk. Visual evidence is harder to deny. People see your father's signature. They see Elise's emails. They see the bank records. It becomes undeniable. Margaret cautioned restraint. But we don't show everything at once. Build tension. Start with the will. That establishes you have standing. Then drop pieces of the fraud one at a time. Let each revelation sink in. Let the audience react. Control the pace. They rehearsed Clara's presentation over and over, timing every pause, every emphasis, every moment of silence. When you show the audio recording, Margaret coached, let it play for at least 30 seconds. Let people hear Elise in her own words planning to destroy you. That's when public opinion shifts permanently. Clara practiced until her delivery was perfect. Not angry, not bitter, but calm and factual. The evidence would provide the emotion. She just needed to present it clearly. The media strategy. Robert had already seeded the story with select journalists, providing anonymous tips that something major was about to break at the Von Hartmann gala. He hadn't given details, just enough to ensure significant media presence. "We'll have at least a dozen outlets there," he explained. "Society reporters covering the event, financial journalists following the foundation, even some criminal justice reporters I've tipped off. When you make your presentation, it'll be recorded from multiple angles. Within hours, it'll be national news." They'd also prepared backup measures. If Elise somehow prevented Clara from speaking at the gala, they had a press conference scheduled for the next morning. If the venue's security tried to remove Clara, they had legal injunctions ready. If Elise tried to discredit the documents, they had forensic experts on call. "We've war-gamed every scenario," Margaret said. "No matter what they do, we have a counter-move. The psychological preparation." But strategy and evidence weren't Clara's only concerns. Margaret recognized what many attorneys missed. This wasn't just legal warfare. It was personal trauma on public display. "You're going to see people who abandoned you," Margaret said gently during a quiet moment. "People who believed the lies. Friends who cut you off. They'll be in that room. Some will apologize. Some will pretend they always supported you. Some will still doubt. You need to be ready for all of it." Clara nodded, appreciating the honesty. "And Elise will say terrible things," Margaret continued. "She'll call you a liar. She'll claim you forged the documents. She'll try to trigger you emotionally, make you look unstable. That's her only play left. You have to stay calm no matter what she says. I can do that. I know you can, but I need you to really prepare for how ugly she'll get. She's fighting for her freedom now. Desperate people are capable of anything." They spent an entire afternoon role-playing the worst-case scenarios. Margaret playing Elise at her most vicious, throwing every possible accusation, every painful memory, every attempt at manipulation. By the end, Clara was ready. The final piece's agent Rodriguez confirmed the FBI would have agents present at the gala, ready to take Elise and Dorian into custody if the evidence presentation warranted it. The charges were already drafted: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud. "The moment you present that evidence publicly," Rodriguez explained, "we can move. We've been building the criminal case in parallel. Your presentation just accelerates the timeline." The attorneys who'd witnessed Adrian's original will were subpoenaed and ready to testify. Dr. Chen had flown in from California and was preparing her counter-evaluation of Sutherland's fraud. Financial forensic experts had traced every dollar stolen from the foundation. The infrastructure of justice was in place. All that remained was the performance. The night before, Clara spent the final evening alone in a hotel room Margaret had arranged, somewhere safe, somewhere Elise's people couldn't find her. She reviewed the documents one more time, but mostly she thought about her father. She imagined him in his study, discovering the plot against her, realizing he was dying and couldn't protect her directly. The pain he must have felt, the desperation, the love that drove him to create this elaborate insurance policy. "I hope this is what you wanted," she whispered, holding his letter. "I hope I'm doing this right." In her mind, she heard his voice from 1,000 childhood conversations. "The right thing is rarely the easy thing, Clara, but it's always worth doing." She set her alarm for 6 a.m. The gala began at 7 p.m. She had 13 hours to prepare for the moment that would define the rest of her life. Clara lay in the darkness, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Tomorrow she would walk back into the world that had destroyed her. Tomorrow she would face the family that had stolen everything. Tomorrow she would speak her truth in front of everyone who doubted her. Tomorrow the Von Hartmann empire would crumble, and from its ashes Clara would rise, not as the broken girl they'd created, but as the woman her father had known she could become. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, slept without nightmares. The day of reckoning was coming. Clara woke before dawn, her body tense with purpose. She showered methodically, letting the hot water ground her in physical sensation. Today was real. Today was happening. Margaret had arranged for a stylist, not for vanity but for armor. "Appearance matters," she'd explained. "You need to look like the rightful heir, not the broken girl they expelled. This is psychological warfare." The stylist arrived at 8, a quiet woman named Simone who asked no questions and worked with professional efficiency. She chose a tailored navy suit, powerful but not aggressive, expensive but not ostentatious. Clara's hair was styled simply, elegantly, minimal jewelry, natural makeup that suggested strength rather than vulnerability. When Simone finished, Clara barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked capable, dangerous, ready. "You look like your father," Simone said softly, packing her supplies. "I worked with the Von Hartmann family for years. Mr. Adrian had that same look when he was about to change something important. That same determination." Clara's eyes burned with unexpected emotion. "You knew him? He was a good man. What they did to you?" Simone paused, choosing words carefully. "A lot of us knew it wasn't right, but we couldn't say anything. Jobs, you know. Families to feed. I'm sorry. You're helping me now, that's what matters." Simone squeezed Clara's shoulder. "Make them pay." The gathering storm. The Von Hartmann annual gala was being held at the Ashford estate, a historic mansion the foundation owned that typically hosted events for major donors. The venue was perfect, large enough for 300 guests, elegant enough to project prestige, and publicly owned enough that Elise couldn't legally bar Clara from attending. Margaret had secured Clara's invitation through legal channels, citing her status as Adrian's daughter and a stakeholder in ongoing estate litigation. The foundation's lawyers had tried to challenge it, but Margaret had threatened to make their exclusion of Adrian's daughter a media story unto itself. They'd backed down. Clara arrived early with her legal team, Margaret, Robert, and 2 paralegals carrying carefully organized evidence binders. FBI agents Rodriguez and Kim were already there, dressed as guests but with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. "We're positioned throughout the venue," Rodriguez murmured as they passed. "The moment you need us, we move." The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, white roses in massive arrangements, tables set with gold-rimmed china. A stage dominated one end, prepared for the evening's program. Behind it, a large screen for presentations. Robert was already coordinating with the tech team, ensuring their evidence files would load properly. He'd brought backup drives and a spare laptop. Nothing would be left to chance. The arrival of guests. By 6:30, guests began arriving. Clara watched from a private side room, her stomach churning as familiar faces appeared. Former family friends, business associates of her father's, politicians who'd benefited from Von Hartmann Foundation donations, society figures who'd attended dinners at the mansion during Clara's childhood. Many of them had cut her off completely after her expulsion. Some had publicly supported Elise's narrative about Clara's instability. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked, watching Clara's expression. "Like I'm about to walk into a room full of people who declared me dead and then went to the funeral." "Good. Use that. Anger is fuel if you control it." At 7 p.m. sharp, Elise Von Hartmann made her entrance. She looked magnificent. A vision in champagne silk, diamonds at her throat and wrists, her hair swept into an elegant updo. She moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting air kisses and compliments with gracious smiles. Dorian followed close behind, playing his role as the dutiful son and foundation director. He wore his success like armor, expensive suit, confident bearing, the easy charm of someone who'd never faced real consequences. They had no idea Clara was there. The guest list was 300 names long. Why would they check for the one person they'd erased from existence? Clara watched them work the room, and something cold settled in her chest. These weren't just criminals. They were performers who'd convinced themselves their own lies were truth. "It's time," Margaret said quietly. The entrance. Clara stepped out of the side room and into the ballroom proper. For a moment, no one noticed, just another guest arriving slightly late. Then someone near the door recognized her. The recognition spread like ripples in water. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The ambient noise of the party began to fade as more people noticed the impossible. Clara Von Hartmann, the disgraced heiress, the expelled daughter, the girl they'd written off as a tragic failure standing in their midst. She walked slowly toward the center of the room, her heels clicking on marble floors. The crowd parted instinctively. Elise was mid-conversation with a state senator when someone whispered urgently in her ear. Her head snapped around, her practiced smile freezing into something brittle and dangerous. Their eyes met across the ballroom. For a long moment, neither moved. The entire room held its breath. Then Clara saw it, the flash of panic in Elise's eyes before she mastered her expression. That single moment of fear before the mask descended. That was when Clara knew she'd already won. Dorian noticed next, his conversation trailing off mid-sentence. His face went pale, then flushed with anger. He started moving toward Clara, but Elise grabbed his arm, stopping him. She was smarter than he was. She knew creating a scene would only make things worse. Clara continued her walk unhurried until she stood in the open space between the stage and the main tables. People backed away slightly, creating a natural circle around her. "Clara," Elise finally said, her voice carrying false warmth. "What a surprise. We didn't realize you'd be joining us this evening." "I'm Adrian Von Hartmann's daughter," Clara replied, her voice clear and steady. "This foundation bears his name. Where else would I be?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some sympathetic, some confused, some hostile. Dorian stepped forward. "This is a private event. You weren't invited." Clara pulled a folded paper from her clutch, her legal invitation, complete with foundation seal. "Actually, I was. Your lawyers confirmed my right to attend as a stakeholder in the estate. Or did they forget to mention that?" Elise's smile sharpened. "Darling, everyone here knows about your situation, your difficulties. Perhaps it would be better if we spoke privately. I'm sure we can find—" "I'm not here to speak privately," Clara interrupted. "I'm here to speak to everyone." She turned to address the crowd, her heart hammering but her voice controlled. "My name is Clara Von Hartmann. Most of you knew my father. Some of you worked with him. All of you benefited from his generosity and vision. What you may not know is how he died, still trying to protect his legacy, and how that legacy has been stolen." "That's enough," Dorian snapped, starting toward her again. But Clara had already signaled to Robert. The lights dimmed slightly, and the screen behind the stage came to life. A photograph appeared, Adrian Von Hartmann smiling in his study, surrounded by his life's work. "Before we continue tonight's celebration," Clara said, projecting her voice to carry through the room, "I think it's important that everyone here knows the truth about what's been happening in my father's name, the truth about the fraud, the lies, the millions stolen from the people this foundation was meant to help." Elise's mask cracked completely. "You have no right—" "I have every right," Clara said, turning to face her. "I have my father's will. I have documented proof of your crimes, and I have his voice, literally, explaining exactly what you did." She held up a document, its edges worn but its seal intact. "This is the real last will and testament of Adrian Von Hartmann, not the version you showed the courts, the real one, the one that gives everything to me and leaves you with nothing." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Elise's face contorted with rage. "That's a forgery. She's lying. She's unstable. We have medical documentation." "You have falsified medical documentation," Clara corrected calmly. "Created by Dr. Marcus Sutherland, who you paid $250,000 to diagnose me with conditions I don't have. I have the bank records of that payment. I have email correspondence between you discussing what diagnosis would be most effective. I have recordings of you planning this entire scheme before my father's body was even cold." Clara nodded to Robert again. A new image appeared on the screen. An email from Elise to Dr. Sutherland, dated 2 weeks after Adrian's death, discussing the psychiatric angle and ensuring the daughter is removed from succession. The room fell silent except for the sound of people reading the projected email, absorbing its implications. Dorian moved toward the stage, desperation replacing confidence. "Those emails are taken out of context. This is a desperate attempt to—" "Context?" Clara pulled out another document. "Fine, let's provide context. Let's start with the $8 million you stole from the foundation before my father's death. Then we'll discuss the asset sales to shell companies you control. Then we'll talk about the 23 charitable programs you've cancelled while claiming the foundation is thriving. Should I continue?" She looked at Elise, at Dorian, at the crowd of wealthy donors who were beginning to realize they'd been complicit in something terrible. "I'm not here for revenge," Clara said, her voice carrying weight beyond her years. "I'm here because my father built something beautiful, and you turned it into a criminal enterprise. I'm here because he saw this coming and left me everything I needed to stop you. I'm here because truth matters, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's ugly, even when it destroys families." She stepped toward the stage, documents in hand, Margaret and her team moving to flank her. "So, please everyone, stay seated. This won't take long. I have evidence to present, recordings to play, and witnesses ready to testify. By the time I'm finished, you'll understand exactly who Adrian Von Hartmann's real heir is, and exactly who deserves to be in handcuffs." Elise lunged toward Clara, all composure abandoned, but security stepped between them. Not Elise's security, the venue's security, who'd been briefed by Margaret's team. "You can't do this," Elise hissed. Clara looked at the woman who'd destroyed her life, and smiled coldly. "Watch me." She climbed the stairs to the stage, the document packet in her hands, her father's voice about to echo through the room one final time. The fall of the von Hartmann empire was about to begin, and Clara was finally ready to let the world see who had really broken whom. Clara stood at the podium, 300 faces staring up at her. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, but she breathed through it. Margaret stood stage left, a silent pillar of support. Robert controlled the presentation from a laptop at the side table. Agent Rodriguez had positioned himself near the exit, ready. The room buzzed with confused conversation. Elise stood frozen near the front tables, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Dorian had his phone out, presumably calling their attorneys. Let them call, Clara thought. Nothing could stop what was about to happen. "Good evening," Clara began, her voice steady through the microphone. "For those who don't know me, or who've forgotten me, my name is Clara Von Hartmann. I am the only biological child of Adrian Augustus von Hartmann, founder of the Von Hartmann Foundation, philanthropist, innovator, and the man whose legacy we supposedly celebrate tonight." She paused, letting that sink in. "I say supposedly because what's happened to my father's foundation since his death is not a celebration, it's a desecration. And tonight, I'm going to prove it." The will. The screen behind her illuminated with the first document, Adrian's will, his signature bold at the bottom. "This is my father's actual last will and testament, executed 2 weeks before his death. It's notarized, witnessed by 3 independent attorneys, and registered with a Boston law firm that had no connection to our family. It has been authenticated by 3 separate forensic document examiners." Clara's voice grew stronger. "This will leave the entirety of my father's estate. The foundation, the properties, the financial assets, to me. Not a single dollar to his widow, Elise von Hartmann, not a single share to Dorian Thornton." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "That's a lie!" Elise shouted from the floor. "The real will was probated. This is a desperate fabrication by a mentally unstable—" "The will you probated," Clara interrupted calmly, "was forged. My father never signed it. And I can prove that too. But let's save that for the criminal investigation that's already underway." She nodded to Robert. A new image appeared, a comparison of signatures from the probated will versus the authentic will, with forensic analysis highlighting the differences. "Notice the pressure points," Clara explained, pointing. "The angle of the signature. My father was right-handed with a distinctive backward slant on his capital H. The probated will shows a forward slant, consistent with someone trying to copy his signature, but getting the biomechanics wrong. The document I'm holding has been verified as authentic by the same forensic experts the FBI uses in fraud cases." A woman in the crowd, Clara recognized her as Martha Cunningham, a longtime Foundation board member, stood up slowly. "Clara, if this is true, why wasn't this will found during probate?" "Because my father hid it," Clara said simply. "He knew there was a conspiracy against me. He knew that after his death, Elise and Dorian would try to take everything. So he created an insurance policy and hid it where only I would think to look." She held up the document for the room to see. "He left me a clue in his final conversation with me. Look where no one would look," he said, "where only you would understand." And I found it, hidden in the piano in his study, in a spot we'd shared as a secret hiding place when I was a child. The detail was specific enough to ring true, intimate enough to be devastating. The medical fraud Clara moved to the next section of her evidence. "But taking my inheritance required more than just forging a will. It required destroying my credibility, making me seem incapable, unstable, unable to manage my father's legacy." The screen changed to show Dr. Sutherland's psychiatric evaluation, the one that had declared Clara mentally incompetent. This evaluation was written by Dr. Marcus Sutherland, a psychiatrist Elise personally selected and paid. It concludes that I suffer from severe depression, paranoid ideation, and borderline personality disorder. It recommends that I be removed from any position of responsibility. Clara paused. "There's just one problem. This evaluation was written before I ever met with Dr. Sutherland." The image changed to show an email dated 2 weeks before Clara's first appointment, with the evaluation already drafted, complete with diagnosis. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "Elise paid Dr. Sutherland $250,000, Clara continued, "to diagnose me with whatever would justify removing me from inheritance consideration. Here's the bank transfer." The screen showed the transaction, $250,000 from an account labeled E. Thornton Personal to Sutherland Medical Consulting LLC. Martha Cunningham's hand flew to her mouth. Others in the crowd were shaking their heads in disbelief. "But my father anticipated this too," Clara said. "He hired an independent psychiatrist, Dr. Rebecca Chen from Stanford Medical School, to evaluate me secretly during his final months." Her conclusion? A new document appeared. Dr. Chen's evaluation, with the summary highlighted, subject demonstrates exceptional psychological resilience and sound judgment. No evidence of any psychiatric disorder. Subject is fully capable of managing complex responsibilities and high-pressure situations. "Dr. Chen is here tonight," Clara said, gesturing to where the psychiatrist sat among the guests. "She's prepared to testify about her evaluation and about the fraudulent nature of Dr. Sutherland's report." Dr. Chen stood, nodding gravely to confirm her presence. Elise's face had gone from red to white. She gripped the table in front of her. "The financial crimes. Now let's talk about what happened after I was expelled from my home," Clara said, her voice hardening. "Let's talk about what Elise and Dorian did with the foundation my father spent his life building." The screen filled with bank records, highlighted in yellow. Transfers to offshore accounts, suspicious payments to shell companies, cancelled charitable programs. In the 18 months since my father's death, the Von Hartmann Foundation has cancelled 23 charitable programs serving homeless youth, domestic violence survivors, and low-income medical clinics. The official reason given was financial restructuring. Clara's voice dripped with controlled anger. But the foundation didn't reduce spending. It redirected spending to accounts controlled by Elise and Dorian. The screen showed a flowchart of money, foundation accounts to shell corporations, to offshore holdings, to personal accounts. Heritage Management Group, owned by Dorian through a Cayman Islands trust. Thornton Consulting LLC, Elise's company registered in Delaware. Eastern Capital Holdings, jointly controlled. These companies received over $15 million in consulting fees and management services from the foundation. $15 million that should have gone to people who needed help. The crowd was silent now, absorbing the scale of the theft. Robert advanced the presentation to show property sales. The foundation owned 12 properties nationwide, homes for transitional housing, community centers, shelters. Elise and Dorian sold 11 of them at below-market prices to companies they secretly controlled, then immediately resold them at market value, pocketing the difference. A society reporter in the back was frantically taking notes. Others had phones out, recording. "The total theft," Clara said, letting the number hang in the air, "exceeds $28 million. $28 million stolen from a charitable foundation meant to help vulnerable people. $28 million that will now result in federal charges." The recordings. "But you don't have to take my word for any of this," Clara said. "You can hear it directly from them." She nodded to Robert. The room went dark except for the screen. Audio began to play. Elise's voice, crystal clear. "Once he's gone, the girl becomes our only problem. We handle her the same way we discussed. The psychiatric angle is foolproof." Dorian's voice. "And if she fights it, she won't. She's weak, emotional, too attached to her father's memory. We'll convince her she's the problem. People like her always believe they're the problem eventually." The recording played for 30 seconds that felt like hours. The crowd sat frozen, listening to the casual cruelty, the calculated manipulation, the complete absence of conscience. When it ended, Clara spoke into the silence. "That was recorded in the Von Hartmann mansion 3 weeks before my father died. He knew what they were planning. He documented everything." Another recording played. This one, Dorian and Elise discussing the financial fraud. "The lawyer said we can restructure the foundation assets through the shell companies without triggering reporting requirements if we keep each transaction under $2 million. And Clara, by the time she figures out what happened, if she ever does, it'll be too late. The money will be untraceable, and she'll have no standing to challenge anything." The recording clicked off. Clara looked out at the crowd and saw her vindication reflected in 300 faces. Shock, disgust, anger, and for many, shame at having believed the lies. The father's voice. "Finally," Clara said softly, "I want to share something personal. My father left me a letter. I'm not going to read all of it. Much of it is private, between a father and daughter. But there's one section I think you should hear." The screen showed Adrian's handwriting, and Clara read, "To everyone who will eventually hear this story, Clara is my daughter, my heir, and my greatest pride. If she's presenting this evidence, it means I was right to fear for her safety and her future. It means Elise and Dorian did exactly what I predicted, and it means Clara was strong enough to survive their worst and find the truth I left for her. Clara's voice wavered slightly but held. I'm asking you to believe her, support her, help her restore what I built. She has my intelligence, my integrity, and my commitment to using wealth as a force for good. She is everything I hoped she would be. Don't let them destroy her the way they tried to destroy everything I worked for. Tears streamed down Clara's face now, but she kept reading. Clara, if you're reading this aloud, it means you were brave enough to come back, brave enough to fight. I always knew you would be. Make them answer for what they've done. Then build something even better than I imagined. I love you beyond measure. Dad. The room was utterly silent, except for the sound of Clara's ragged breathing. The confrontation, Elise finally snapped. She charged toward the stage, security moving to intercept her. You manipulative little bitch, she screamed, all elegance abandoned. So you forged those documents. You're exactly as unstable as we said. Everyone here knows I'm FBI agent Marcus Rodriguez. A voice rang out as Rodriguez stepped into the light, badge raised. Elise Von Hartmann, Dorian Thornton, you're both under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Two more agents appeared, moving toward Elise and Dorian with handcuffs. The crowd erupted in chaos, gasps, shouts, people standing to get a better view. Dorian tried to run but was intercepted immediately. Elise fought the handcuffs, still screaming about forgeries and lies, but her voice was drowned out by the commotion. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Rodriguez said calmly, reading them their Miranda rights while reporters captured every moment. Clara stood at the podium, watching the family that destroyed her being led away in handcuffs, and felt something break loose in her chest. Not pain, but release. Years of doubt, shame, and self-blame evaporating in the face of vindication. The aftermath. Martha Cunningham approached the stage as the FBI led Elise and Dorian out. Clara, she said, her voice thick with emotion, I am so deeply sorry. We failed you. We failed your father. We should have questioned. You believed what you were told, Clara said quietly. They were convincing. That's what made them dangerous. What happens now? Clara looked at Margaret, who nodded. Now we rebuild, Clara said. The foundation board will be restructured. Every program that was cancelled will be reinstated. Every dollar that was stolen will be recovered and put back to work helping people. And the Von Hartmann name will mean what my father intended it to mean. Integrity, compassion, and real change. Martha wiped her eyes. We're with you. However we can help. Others approached. Board members, donors, former family friends, offering apologies, support, commitment. Some Clara accepted graciously. Some she simply acknowledged with a nod, not yet ready to forgive those who'd abandoned her completely. The media surrounded the stage, questions flying. Robert stepped in to manage them, scheduling a formal press conference for the following morning. As the chaos swirled around her, Clara's eyes found Dr. Chen in the crowd. The psychiatrist offered a small, proud smile and a nod of respect. Clara had done it. She'd walked back into the world that destroyed her and burned it down with truth. The girl they'd tried to erase had just reclaimed everything, and she was only getting started. Clara woke in a hotel suite Margaret had arranged, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. For the first moment in 18 months, she woke without the crushing weight of despair. Her phone had been buzzing all night. She'd turned it off around 2 a.m., unable to process more messages. Now as she powered it on, the notifications flooded in. 247 missed calls, 582 text messages, 1,043 emails. The story had gone viral. Every major news outlet had covered it. Heiress exposes stepmother's multi-million-dollar fraud. CNN. Von Hartmann Foundation scandal. Secret will reveals conspiracy. The New York Times. FBI arrests socialite and son for elaborate inheritance scheme. Washington Post. But the headlines that made Clara's breath catch were different. Clara Von Hartmann, the daughter who wouldn't stay buried, and how a hidden document destroyed a criminal empire. They were finally telling her story, the true one. The arrests. Elise and Dorian had been held overnight at the Federal Detention Center in Manhattan. Margaret called at 8 a.m. with updates. The prosecutors are throwing everything at them, she reported. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, forgery, obstruction of justice. Elise is looking at 15 to 20 years, Dorian 12 to 18. Their attorneys tried to arrange bail, but the judge denied it. Flight risk, given the offshore accounts. Dr. Sutherland, arrested this morning at his home in Greenwich. He's cooperating, which means he'll probably testify against Elise in exchange for a reduced sentence. The medical board has already suspended his license pending investigation. Clara absorbed this, feeling not triumph but a strange emptiness. She'd won, but winning felt different than she'd imagined. "What about the foundation?" she asked. The board held an emergency meeting at 6 a.m. They voted unanimously to recognize you as Adrian's rightful heir and to install you as interim director. The resolution passed with a formal apology for their failure to investigate Elise's claims about your mental health. Interim director of her father's foundation, the position Elise had stolen. "There's more," Margaret continued. 3 board members resigned this morning, citing their failure to provide adequate oversight. The remaining members are requesting to meet with you this afternoon to discuss immediate restructuring and program restoration. I'll be there. The public response. The press conference at 10 a.m. was packed. Robert had arranged it at a neutral venue, a hotel conference room that could accommodate 50 journalists plus camera crews. Clara wore another tailored suit, her hair pulled back, her expression composed. Margaret sat beside her with Dr. Chen and Agent Rodriguez flanking them as visual support for her credibility. The questions came fast. "Clara, how did you survive 18 months of homelessness and poverty?" "I wasn't homeless," Clara corrected gently. "I had an apartment in Queens. I worked at a coffee shop. I lived like millions of Americans live, paycheck to paycheck without safety nets. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me what my father always tried to teach, that dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from how you treat yourself and others." "Do you hate your stepmother?" Clara paused, considering. "I don't have space in my life for hate. What Elise and Dorian did was criminal, cruel, and devastating. But hating them wouldn't rebuild the foundation or help the people who were hurt by their greed. Justice is happening through the legal system. My focus is on restoration, not revenge. What's your message to other people who've been gaslit or manipulated by family members?" This question made Clara's eyes water. "Document everything. Trust your memories. Seek outside perspectives from people who don't have a stake in controlling your narrative. And remember that surviving their abuse doesn't make you weak. It makes you a warrior. You're stronger than they ever wanted you to believe." The room erupted in camera flashes. The foundation. That afternoon, Clara walked into the Von Hartmann Foundation headquarters for the first time since her father's death. The building was a converted brownstone in Manhattan's Upper East Side, elegant but understated, exactly like Adrian. The remaining board members stood as she entered the conference room. Martha Cunningham, James Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, Patricia Alvarez, Richard Santos, and 3 others Clara recognized from foundation events during her childhood. "Clara," Martha began, her voice shaking, "we owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. We failed in our fiduciary duty to question Elise's management. We failed in our moral duty to investigate her claims about you. We failed your father's memory and his mission. If you choose to replace all of us, we'll understand." Clara sat at the head of the table, her father's chair, and looked at each of them. "My father chose you because he trusted your judgment and your commitment to his mission. Elise was a sophisticated con artist who fooled federal regulators, banks, and legal professionals. I don't blame you for believing her." She paused. "But I do expect you to help me rebuild. No more rubber stamping decisions. No more deference to authority without evidence. We question everything. We verify everything. We put the mission above personalities. Can you do that?" They nodded, relief and determination on their faces. "Then let's start rebuilding." The programs over the following weeks. Clara and the board worked 18-hour days to resurrect cancelled programs. The youth homeless shelter in Brooklyn, shuttered by Elise to sell the property, was repurchased from the shell company at a steep discount given the FBI's fraud investigation, and reopened within 3 weeks. The domestic violence support program that had served over 200 families annually was reinstated with increased funding. The medical clinic providing free care in underserved neighborhoods received a grant that doubled its capacity. Clara visited each location personally, meeting staff and clients, listening to their stories of how the programs had changed their lives and how devastating the cancellations had been. At the Brooklyn shelter, a young woman named Maria approached her shyly. "You're really her? The daughter who came back?" Clara nodded. "They told us this place was closing because there wasn't enough money. But that was a lie, wasn't it?" "Yes, it was a lie." Maria's eyes filled with tears. This shelter saved my life. When I aged out of foster care, I had nowhere to go. This place gave me a bed, helped me finish school, connected me to a job program. Without it, I'd have been on the streets, and they almost took it away just to steal money. Clara pulled the young woman into a hug, both of them crying. It's back now, and it's never closing again, I promise. These moments, these faces, reminded Clara why the fight had mattered. This wasn't about inheritance or revenge. It was about the hundreds of people her father had helped, and the thousands more he'd intended to help. The financial recovery. The FBI's forensic accountants traced the stolen money with impressive precision. Of the $28 million taken, $23 million was recovered from frozen offshore accounts. The remaining $5 million had been spent on Elise and Dorian's lifestyle: luxury cars, designer clothes, a yacht, a vacation home in the Hamptons. We'll recover most of it through asset seizures, Agent Rodriguez explained. The cars, the yacht, the property, all purchased with stolen foundation money. It's all forfeitable. Additionally, insurance policies on the foundation's board covered some of the losses. Between recovered funds and insurance, the foundation would be nearly whole. Your father was smart, Margaret noted. He built in financial protections even beyond the hidden will. The foundation's structure makes it resilient. Clara smiled sadly. He was always 3 steps ahead. The personal reckonings. Not everyone who'd abandoned Clara came back with apologies. Some former friends remained silent, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps still skeptical despite the evidence, but some did reach out. Hannah Mitchell, Clara's childhood best friend, appeared at the foundation office one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "I should have believed you," she said without preamble. "When you called me, when you tried to tell me something was wrong, I should have listened. Instead, I believed your stepmother. I'm so sorry, Clara. I failed you when you needed me most." Clara wanted to be angry, wanted to reject the apology, but looking at Hannah's genuine anguish, she couldn't. "You believed what you were told by adults you trusted," Clara said quietly. "I don't blame you for that, but I can't pretend the last year didn't happen either. I need time." Hannah nodded, accepting the boundary. "Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready, I understand. Some bridges could be rebuilt, others were burned beyond repair." Clara was learning to tell the difference. The media transformation. The same outlets that had published Elise's narrative about Clara's instability now fell over themselves to correct the record. Manhattan Society magazine, which had run the Fallen Heiress article, published a front-page retraction and feature story. Clara Von Hartmann, the heir who rose from ashes. Society columnists who'd written dismissive pieces about her mental breakdown now praised her remarkable resilience and inspiring comeback. Clara found the reversal darkly amusing. "6 months ago, these same people called me delusional," she told Robert. "Now I'm a hero. It's all narrative." "That's why controlling your own narrative matters," Robert replied. "They'll write whatever story sells. Make sure it's the true one." The sentencing preview Elise and Dorian's trial was scheduled for 8 months out, but their attorneys were already negotiating plea deals. The evidence was overwhelming. Going to trial would only result in harsher sentences. "Elise is looking at a plea for 12 years, Margaret reported. Dorian 10. Both would have to make full restitution and face permanent injunctions against managing charitable organizations. Will they take it? Their attorneys are advising them to. The alternative is risking 20 years if a jury convicts on all counts. Clara tried to imagine Elise in prison, the woman who'd worn silk and diamonds, who'd moved through high society like royalty, now in an orange jumpsuit in a federal facility. She felt no satisfaction, just a dull acknowledgement that justice, while necessary, couldn't undo the damage. The father's legacy honored. 6 weeks after the exposure, the foundation held a memorial event for Adrian von Hartmann. A proper one, not the performance Elise had orchestrated. Clara stood before a gathering of people who'd actually known her father, actually cared about his work, and spoke from the heart. "My father believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. He believed that those who have much owe much to those who have little. He believed in second chances, in rehabilitation, in the fundamental dignity of every human being." She looked out at the crowd. "Elise and Dorian tried to destroy that legacy for personal gain. They failed, because my father built something stronger than any individual, stronger than greed, stronger than lies. He built a mission, and that mission lives on." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, Clara placed flowers at a memorial stone the foundation had commissioned, a simple granite marker in the foundation's courtyard garden. engraved with Adrian's favorite quote, "The measure of our lives is what we do with what we've been given." "I'm doing it, Dad," Clara whispered, touching the cold stone. "I'm using what you gave me, and I won't let them destroy it ever again." The wind rustled through the garden, and for a moment Clara could swear she felt her father's presence. Not literally, but as a warmth in her chest, a steadiness in her spine, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The consequences of Elise and Dorian's crimes were unfolding exactly as they should, and Clara was finally truly free. The Von Hartmann Foundation's annual report bore Clara's signature for the first time. The document told a story of resurrection. 23 programs restored, 15 new initiatives launched, donor confidence rebuilt, and a financial audit that revealed 0 irregularities. Clara sat in her father's study, now her study, reviewing the numbers. The foundation was serving more people than it had even under Adrian's leadership. The wealth Elise and Dorian had tried to steal was now feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, educating the underserved. "Your father would be proud," Martha said from the doorway. She'd become Clara's closest advisor, her guilt transformed into fierce loyalty and tireless work. "I hope so," Clara replied. "Some days I still feel like I'm pretending to be someone capable of this. Imposter syndrome is common among people who achieve great things," Martha said gently. "But Clara, look at what you've built. Look at what you've restored. You're not pretending, you're leading." The new programs. Clara had launched several initiatives that reflected both her father's values and her own hard-won insights. The Second Chances program provided support for people rebuilding after personal crises, job training, mental health services, housing assistance. It was informed by Clara's own experience of having lost everything and understanding how difficult the climb back could be. "We help people who've been told they're broken," Clara explained at the program's launch. "People who've been gaslit, manipulated, or simply beaten down by circumstances beyond their control. We tell them, you're not broken, you're rebuilding, and we're here to help." The program served former foster youth, domestic abuse survivors, people recovering from mental health crises, and individuals re-entering society after incarceration. In its first 6 months, it helped 127 people find stable housing and employment. The Truth and Transparency Initiative worked with journalists and legal advocates to expose financial fraud in charitable organizations. Clara had learned firsthand how easily non-profits could be corrupted. Now she was helping prevent it elsewhere. "My father's foundation was stolen because no one was watching closely enough," Clara told a gathering of non-profit leaders. "We're teaching people what warning signs to look for, how to demand accountability, how to protect missions from being hijacked by greed, and perhaps most personally meaningful, the Adrian's Legacy Scholarship Program for children who'd lost parents young. It provided not just tuition but mentorship, therapy, and support networks, everything Clara wished she'd had during her grief. The personal healing. Clara had started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Zhao, who specialized in family trauma and complex grief. The work was hard, often painful but necessary. "You're grieving multiple losses," Dr. Zhao explained during one session. "Your father's death, the family you thought you had, the version of yourself that existed before the betrayal. All of that needs to be mourned." Clara had learned to separate her grief from her guilt, to recognize that Elise's manipulation had been sophisticated and intentional, not something Clara should have been able to prevent. "I spent a year thinking I was crazy," Clara admitted during therapy. "I genuinely started to believe I was the problem." "That's what gaslighting does," Dr. Zhao replied. "It makes you doubt your own reality. Recovering from that isn't about getting over it. It's about rebuilding trust in yourself." Slowly, Clara was learning to trust her instincts again, to believe her memories, to accept that surviving manipulation didn't mean she was weak. It meant she was resilient enough to endure and overcome. The restored relationships. Some relationships from Clara's past life could be salvaged. Hannah Mitchell had proven her renewed loyalty through consistent actions over months, showing up, offering support without expectation, respecting boundaries. Eventually, Clara let her back in. "I can't promise I'll ever fully trust the way I did before," Clara told her honestly over coffee, "but I can try, and I want to try." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." They were rebuilding their friendship slowly, carefully, with realistic expectations and honest communication. It would never be what it was, but it could become something different, perhaps something stronger. Other relationships stayed broken. Some former family friends had revealed their true natures during Clara's lowest moments. She had no interest in pretending those revelations didn't matter. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, Dr. Zhao had counseled. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. Clara was learning to be okay with that. The legal conclusion Elise and Dorian's sentencing hearing arrived on a cold November morning. Clara attended, sitting in the gallery with Margaret beside her. Elise, now gaunt and hollow-eyed from months in detention, received 13 years in federal prison plus full restitution. Dorian received 11 years under similar terms. Dr. Sutherland, who'd cooperated fully with prosecutors, received 3 years and permanent revocation of his medical license. When offered the chance to make a statement, Elise turned to look directly at Clara for the first time in months. "You destroyed our family," she said, her voice venomous despite the circumstances. "Everything we did was to protect the foundation from your incompetence. You've twisted the truth." "That's enough, Mrs. Thornton," the judge interrupted sharply. "Your lack of remorse is noted for the record and will be considered during parole review." Clara felt nothing as she watched them be led away. No triumph, no satisfaction, no closure, just a quiet acceptance that this chapter was ending. Justice had been served. Now she could focus on building rather than fighting. The mansion. Clara had avoided the Von Hartmann mansion for months, unable to face the memories, but eventually she knew she had to return, not to live there, but to decide its fate. She walked through the empty halls, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. The furniture remained as it had been, covered in dust sheets, frozen in time. In her father's study, she sat at his desk and felt the weight of everything that had happened in this space. His death, his planning, her discovery, the beginning of her resurrection. "I can't live here," she said aloud to the empty room. "Too many ghosts." Instead, Clara decided to transform the mansion into the Foundation's headquarters. The grand rooms would become offices, meeting spaces, program centers. The gardens would host community events. The legacy her father built in this house would continue, but transformed. She commissioned a plaque for the entrance hall, the Adrian Von Hartmann Center for Philanthropic Excellence, in memory of a man who believed wealth was responsibility restored by his daughter, who proved truth cannot stay buried. The cemetery visit. On the anniversary of Adrian's death, Clara visited his grave alone. She'd come regularly over the past months, updating him on her progress, sharing victories and struggles. Today, she brought a copy of the Foundation's annual report and her father's letter, which she'd had professionally preserved. "We did it, Dad," she said, kneeling by the headstone. "Everything you hoped for. The Foundation is stronger than ever. The programs are helping thousands. Your name means what you wanted it to mean. Integrity, compassion, real change." Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't only sad tears anymore. "I found what you left me. I used it the way you knew I would. And I promise I'll protect your legacy for as long as I live. Not because it's mine, because it matters." She placed her hand on the cold marble. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for preparing me. Thank you for leaving me the weapon I needed to fight back. And thank you for being the kind of father who taught me that falling down doesn't define you. Getting back up does." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the smell of autumn leaves and distant rain. Clara stood, wiping her eyes, and looked out over the grounds where so many names were etched in stone. People who'd lived, loved, built things, and left legacies behind. "I'm not broken anymore," she whispered. "I'm exactly who you hoped I'd be." The final scene. 3 days later, Clara stood before a room full of Foundation staff, donors, and program participants for the annual gala, the first one under her true leadership. She looked out at faces that now showed respect, support, belief in her vision. She looked at the programs displayed on screens around the room. Lives changed, communities strengthened, hope restored, and she thought about the journey. From the broken girl expelled from her home with nothing, to the woman standing here now leading her father's mission into the future. "My father used to say that the measure of our lives is what we do with what we've been given," Clara began, her voice clear and strong. "I was given wealth, privilege, and opportunity. Then I had it all stolen. Then I had to fight to reclaim it." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "But what I learned in that fight changed everything. I learned that dignity doesn't come from wealth. It comes from refusing to accept lies about who you are. I learned that surviving someone's worst doesn't make you weak. It reveals your strength. I learned that the only inheritance that truly matters isn't money or property or status. It's integrity. It's the courage to stand up, when standing up costs you everything. It's the refusal to let cruelty have the final word. Clara looked directly into the cameras recording the event, knowing her words would reach beyond this room. So to anyone who's been told they're broken, who's been gaslit, manipulated, or written off, I want you to know something. They're wrong about you. Your truth matters. Your survival matters. And someday, when you're ready, you'll rise. And when you do, you'll be stronger than anyone who tried to destroy you ever imagined. She held up a folder. The same document packet her father had left her, now displayed in the Foundation's archive. This is what my father left me. Proof of fraud, evidence of conspiracy, and a letter telling me I was stronger than I knew. But the real inheritance wasn't the documents. It was the lesson behind them. Clara's voice grew soft but fierce. He taught me that truth doesn't stay buried, that justice might be delayed but not denied, that one person with evidence and courage can bring down an empire built on lies. She set the folder down and smiled, genuinely, warmly, without the weight that had crushed her for so long. They broke my life. They stole my home, my name, my inheritance, my reputation. They convinced the world I was unstable, incapable, broken beyond repair. Clara's eyes blazed with quiet fire. But my father left me everything I needed to prove them wrong, to reclaim what was mine, to rise from the ashes they created and build something even stronger than before. She let the silence stretch, let the moment breathe. So here I stand, unbroken, unbowed, and just getting started. The room erupted in applause, standing, sustained, full of genuine emotion. Clara looked out at the crowd, then up toward the ceiling, imagining her father somewhere beyond it, watching, proud. They broke my life, she thought. But you left everything for me to rise. And I did, Dad. I did. The Von Hartmann legacy lived on. Not in the hands of thieves and manipulators, but in the hands of a daughter who'd been destroyed and remade into something unbreakable. The document had been found. The empire had fallen. The truth had won. And Clara Von Hartmann, the heir who refused to stay buried, was finally, fully, triumphantly alive.